Hello folks, welcome back to the Wikipedia world and I am Abhinay Gupta. Today again we'll continue with the topic, the meeting of board and its powers. So we know that in this chapter we had to cover a lot of sections ranging from section 173 to section 195 of the Companies Act 2013, right? And among them we have already covered a lot of sections and we have very small sections in the 190 range which is remaining. But yeah, we have a big section remaining, that is section 188, and that is what we will be covering in this lecture. So section 188, as you all know, deals with the related party transactions, right? And this is a little lengthy section, and I would say it is also a very important section for your May 2016 examination. It has been asked recently in your 2014 examination as well. Plus, the major thing that makes this section important for your attempt in May 2016 examination onwards is that you have an amendment in this section. That too, you have basically 2 amendments in this section, right? So the examiner may test you on those amendments as well. Otherwise also, if you have any question on this section, make sure to give a note about the amendment. I will tell you at the end of the class what is the kind of note you need to give, right, and with what reference am I talking about, right? So, and we'll also discuss the questions that have been asked in your previous examination and also some of the frequently asked questions, the doubts in the practical life as well, right? So we'll start with the discussion of section 188, which is the related party transaction, and while we're discussing this section we will complete it along with the reference to rule number 15 of Companies Meeting of Board and its Power Rule 2014. So when we talk about the related party transaction, what is the first thing that comes to our mind? Yes, the important aspect of this section is the related party. So who is considered to be your related party? And that is defined by section 2 clause 76. As you know, all the definitions of a chapter is covered in section 2, the definition of this act, right? And clause 76 of section 2 defines or gives you the meaning of the related parties. So you basically have 8 points when you're dealing with the related party, right? So we will discuss them in detail now. So the definition of related party as per section 2 clause 76 includes the directors and the key managerial person into the definition of related party. So if there's a company, then in that company the directors of that company, the managing board, and also the key managerial person of the company, the manager of the company specifically, are considered to be related parties. So any transaction with these 2 people, if a company is entering into a transaction with its own director and its own key managerial person, that would be considered to be a related party transaction, right? But there are normal situation in the scenario that if a director wants to reap the benefit of being a director of any company, if he wants to get into a transaction with a company, and if there is a restriction on the director, then what the director specifically would be doing is involve some of his relatives. So that is the best way to move out of a restriction. Do it on the name of a relative, right? So basically the definition of related party has also thought about this, and so they have also included the director's relative and the key managerial person's relative into the definition of related party. So even if the director or the relative or the key managerial person or the relative is entering into a transaction with the company, we would consider it to be a related party transaction, and the provisions of section 188 would be applicable on that transaction, right? So those were the basic 2 points. The third inclusion in the definition is a firm in which this director or the key managerial person or his relative, because now we see the relative is basically an extension of the director or key managerial person, right? So we would include a director, the key managerial person and its relative. If any of these 3 people are partner in any particular partnership firm, then that firm will also be considered to be a related party. Understand? Okay. Because basically if a director or KMP or relative is entering into a transaction, they may not enter into their personal capacity. If they have a firm registered, they may try to get into a transaction through that firm, right? So any transaction of that sort will have to be looked after with a great detail, right? Skepticism is the word. So we have covered them into the definition of related party, and hence those transactions will be governed by section 188, right? So now that we have covered the director, KMP, relatives and the firm, right? Now next thing is a private company, right? So how can a director now manipulate a transaction through a private company? So if a director is a director or a manager or a member, in a private company, then they can again have an influence. Okay, it is because private companies are basically closely held companies. There are very few members and very few directors, right? There is a limitation on that. So basically the directors or the members, they are basically the common people in general scenario. So, and they are the owner of those companies. So same as we talked about a partnership firm being involved for the transaction, they can also involve their company, which is a private company. So the director can reap the benefit of his directorship by entering into a transaction with its own company, that is its private company, and then he may take the advantage of his position as a director. So we have also covered the private company of that director or that KMP or the relative into the purview of the definition, right? Then we move on to the public company. Now public company is not a closely held company, right? The shares are distributed to n number of shareholders in the market. There are n numbers actually. So what happens is that any particular member having a definite percentage, like a natural number percentage, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, even they can have a major stake at times, right? So in case of public company, it says that if the director or manager, right, is a director and holds along with his relative more than 2% of the paid up share capital. So there are two things to notice. First, we are talking about the director or the manager being a director specifically, right? So if they are a director or a manager, any one of them is a director, plus first condition is they have to be a director. Then additional condition is that they should be holding along with the relatives. There can be a situation director holds 1%, relative holds 1%, another relative holds 1%, is 3%. So it says the director along with relatives will see how much is his power in that company. So if they have more than 2% of the voting of the paid up share capital of the company, that means they have certain power in the company, right? And then if they are holding 2% share, then for their benefit they could also enter into a transaction with the same company, with our company, right? Because if they gain out of it, the shareholders gain. And when they have 2%, they have a say in their voting power, right? So any public company in which they are a director and as well as they hold shares and the bandwidth is 2%, right? So we have seen firm is involved, private company is involved, public company is involved. Now apart from them, if there is any other body corporate on which the director or manager has certain control, which is to say, if we go by the definition specifically, it says any body corporate whose board of directors, managing director or manager is accustomed to act in accordance with the advice, direction or instruction of the director or manager. That is what the text of the definition says. So that means if the director or the manager of your company, in whose case we are seeking the, or in whose case we are analyzing the related party, so that director or manager, if they have a control, that means if the other body corporate's board of director or manager, they act as per the discretion, as per the instruction of the director or the KMP, the manager of the company under consideration, right? If that is the matter, then that body corporate will also be considered to be a related party, right? Because ultimately whatever that body corporate is doing is governed by the director or the manager of this company. So if you are entering into a transaction, then we would always assume that that transaction has been initiated by this director himself. He has involved both the companies in which he has a say, in which he has a hold, and he wants them to enter into a transaction. So that transaction can be a suspicious transaction, right? So we will govern such transaction as per the provisions of section 188. right? Now there is a situation that there can be a third person who controls your director and KMP. There is a possibility, right? So even that third person on whose directions your director or manager is accustomed to act, on whose instruction your director or manager is accustomed to act, that company or that person who is giving those advice to your director or manager will also be considered to be your related party. So like it is a vice versa situation. In the above scenario, you have seen that you are controlling another body corporate. Over here, another body corporate is controlling you. Any other person is controlling you, right? So it is a reversal applied over there, right? But in both the case, if that advice, instruction, direction, whatever was being transferred, if that is given in a professional capacity, then we would not consider it. That okay, if that body corporate is accustomed to act on his advice, his instruction or his direction, my directors, but my director is giving those advice in professional capacity, like he has been engaged by that company for such and such specific task, it is not his company, or he is not benefiting out of it, it is just being done in professional capacity and the company is aware of that. So in that situation we would let it go. But otherwise, if he is interested and if he controls that company without being in professional capacity, that means in his personal capacity, being a director, right? So that situation will be covered, but if it is done in professional capacity, we would not cover it into the definition. And the last, what they cover is the holding, subsidiary and associate companies. So if you are a company X, then your holding company. If you don't have a holding company, if you are a holding company, then your subsidiary companies, right? Your associate companies. And if you have a holding company and that holding company has another subsidiary company, then both of you and the other subsidiary will also be considered to be related party, right? And then the last point says such other person as may be prescribed. So that is basically the definition given under section 2 clause 76. That is the meaning of related party. You have 8 points over there. First, director relative, KMP relative, firm connected with director KMP, private company, public company, body corporate, other person, the reversal that we had applied, right? Professional capacity will not be included, and the holding subsidiary associate. So this is how you remember. Just pick the keywords and then you know, because we have explained it so far, you will understand itself. When we are talking about private company, you will understand that okay, when we are talking about private company, it is such and such situation, because we know private companies, closely held company, they have the power. In public company, you have to remember the threshold, that is 2%, right? Otherwise, in body corporate also accustomed to act, other person you are accustomed to act, professional capacity is excluded, and holding, subsidiary, associate and common holding is one thing that you don't need to actually memorize. You know it, that they are to be related parties, right? With that, now as we move ahead, as we advance with this section, you will understand and you will come to know that the process of dealing with the related party transaction is a little cumbersome. So if you have to do it very often, it becomes a headache, right? It becomes a task. So that is why this becomes a little problem for the private companies, especially the 8th point. If we see in the definition, the group companies that we're talking about, the holding, subsidiary, because in case of private company is a closely held company. So it's maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 owners of the company, and they are managing the company, they are the director, they are the members, everything is done by them. So if they have a holding company or if they have a subsidiary company, again that holding or subsidiary is their company, right? In general scenario, if they have an associate. So these group companies transactions basically in a private company is a major thing to witness, because they at many times utilize the same resources, right? Maybe they have a factory and they are running it in various batches, various shifts. There are some particular machinery both of them are using. There is one expert that they have hired and both the companies are using. There are many resources that they would be using interchangeably, and there are other companies that they may create, like if they are producing something, then that finished good can be a raw material for their second company, and then the final product emerges out. right? So every time whatever they produce will be sold to that company because they are specifically producing for the other company, and both the companies are actually holding a subsidiary or whatever it is. That is the kind of scenario you basically see in the market, in the practical life, right? You have been auditing people, you have been an intern, so you must have dealt with private companies and you know the structure of a private company, right? So that is how it actually moves ahead. So if don't you think that always when we apply that restriction that you have to pass a board resolution or a special resolution or these are the limits, blah blah, all the things that you have in 188 that we will be covering further, if the private company goes on to do it every time they enter into a transaction, which is their ordinary business, they are doing the business for that purpose, then it becomes cumbersome, right? So far this act, Companies Act 2013, did not allow provide any relaxation on that, but now they have an amendment in June 2015 according to which the 8th clause, that is the group company section, that particular portion will not be included in the definition of related party for the private companies specifically. So for the private companies, they're holding subsidiary and stuff. For those, the transaction entering, when they enter into a transaction with those companies, they are not supposed to abide by the entire provision of 188. There they have been given an exemption, right? And this exemption is a new exemption and will be applicable from your May 16 examination onwards. So you need to understand what exemption you have received, right? We have one more exemption in this section 188. We'll deal with it as we commence with the provisions of the section, right? Where applicable, I will give you the background and then I'll give you the amendment, right? So we have seen the definition of related party. Now we'll move on to see what are the contracts and arrangement on which section 188 applies. That means first we have identified who are our related parties. Yes, these are the people. If we are entering into a transaction with these people, then it is a suspicious transaction and we'll have to follow the provision of 188, right? But do you think we'll be covering all the transaction with these people? Every minute transaction, every big transaction, everything? Not all, right? But still the section covers a majority of them. So we'll see the section has already defined what are the basic transactions that you will be covering in this section 188. So if you are entering into such transaction with a related party, then it is considered to be a related party transaction. So the heading related party transaction is being defined completely. Who are your related parties and what are the transactions, right? So we'll move ahead and we'll see what the transactions are. So before we start discussing the contracts or arrangement, right, the transactions that we are actually going to cover in section 188, let us think about it for one moment. Basically, if there is a company, any kind of a company, right, majorly in most scenarios, what have you seen? What is the purpose of a company? What does a company do? What are their operating activities, right? So basically what they do is either their manufacturing unit, they manufacture something, they sell it, they buy raw material, they convert it into finished good, they sell it, right? Otherwise they are service providing companies. They provide various professional and qualified services to other, or support services, whatever kind of services they provide, right? Then you know, for a company, if you're establishing a machinery, if you're establishing a factory, something, you need to buy some properties and you have to then you take some properties on lease, right? Or then you dispose it off at the end also. And if you are manufacturing big units, then you sell properties if you're into real estate. And these are the basic kinds of transactions that you see, right? So these aspects basically cover all the kind of transactions. Yeah, you may have other transactions as well, I'm not denying that, but these are the general things that you see in the market. Even if you have been into auditing, if you have been to any company, you know that their work will somewhere or the other relate to this. Either they're selling something or they're giving service, because that is what is generating revenue for them, right? So now if you look at the definition, or if you look at the applicability of 188, what are the contracts and arrangement, what are the transactions, then it says exactly the same thing. First thing is they talk about sale, purchase or supply of any goods or material. So if the company is entering into a transaction, that transaction relates to selling purchasing or supplying any good or material, then we would consider it to be a transaction as per 188. And if it is done with a related party, then it will be completely covered under 188, right? Next you have selling or otherwise disposing of or buying property of any kind, right? We discussed. So if you're not going into goods and material and you're dealing in properties, either you're buying properties or you're selling properties, or anyway you're disposing of properties. So if there is that kind of transaction, we'll again cover it over here, right? Then you have leasing of property of any kind. Even leasing is a task. And basically why we do this, because these are basic areas where you can manipulate, right? Where you can be suspicious about, right? Next is availing or rendering of any service, right? So we have covered sale purchase of goods, we have covered services, we have covered the properties of any kind, right? Whether you sell, you buy, whatever you do, or you lease the property. So these are the four basic category of transactions that is covered under 188, right? Now the next point is appointing an agent for A, B and D, which is sale purchase, selling or otherwise buying the property, or availing or rendering service. If you do this by yourself or you are doing this by or through an agent, you had an agent, right, for the purpose of purchase or sale of goods, material, service or property or these kind of things, then even that transaction through an agent will also be covered under the provision of 188, right? Now apart from these are with external people, right? But now if you have a person in particular, a related party, and you get him involved into your own company, right? So if there is a related party who is appointed to any office or place of profit in the company, in its subsidiary or in its associate, then we would consider it to be a related party transaction. That means if you are paying something, if you have hired them, if they are holding a position in a company, if they are holding an office or place of profit in a company, that means you are paying them something. So that payment when you're making, will be considering it to be a related party transaction. So we'll have to check whether you're going as per your arm length decisions, your arm length settings, or there is a biasness, or you're favoring your related party. So that is a matter that we need to check. And finally you cover the last aspect, that if your related party, any of your related party, is undertaking to underwrite the subscription of any securities or derivative of your company, then even that kind of transaction will also be covered into related party transaction, and we'll have to apply the provisions of section 188 on that as well, right? So basically now I think you get the feel and you get to understand what related party is and what are related party transactions. So once you're clear with this concept, that is when we can move ahead with the other provisions that we will be studying in this section. Is a very nominal provision. Blah 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 blah, dot 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 dot, tick 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 tick. Yes, these are the things we need to follow. There are just steps provided, but basically when you get the question, this is what will help you to identify what it is, right? This is what will help you to identify how to proceed with the question, whether or not the section is applicable on the question, and if applicable, then what are the provisions, right? So this is the basic two areas that you need to understand and you need to sink in, which will help you in solving the problems, right? So we'll be covering up the other provisions in the continuing lecture. So until then, stay tuned. This is Abhinav Gupta signing off. Thank you. Bye bye.